We must understand that there is no free ride, there is no free lunch, and there's no such thing as free speech. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Sane Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 16, Chapter 8.
Free speech.
Freedom of speech. Freedom of expression. It's not what it used to be. Was it ever? Free speech, it's held up as a beacon of basic human rights, the foundation of a free society, the definition of what separates us from the oppressed. Free speech. Some proudly wave it as the symbolic flag of democracy. Others hide behind it to utter vile and hateful epithets. We have free speech, but do we really? The answer is no. First of all, we only think we do because we compare ourselves to countries where freedom of speech is frowned upon by those in power. Countries where the media is controlled by the government, like Russia and Hungary, where people aren't confident in expressing contrary opinion to the ruling party, like North Korea, or where neighbors are encouraged to spy and report on neighbors who don't toe the line, like Iran. Compared to those, I guess we have freedom of speech. Second of all is the great importance we have put on free speech, as we humans, we're forming our free societies. It's the big one, right? Above all the other freedoms. We shouldn't have to give up any freedoms, but especially that one, freedom of speech, because it's that important, we think. Wow, that's a lot of pressure on free speech. I'll tell you one thing, I'd rather live for it than die for it. Free speech, who invented that? Well, as with many things, it goes at least as far back as the ancient Greeks. Gotta hand it to those ancient Greeks, huh? Even 2,500 years ago, they were coming up with all kinds of strange concepts. Philosophy, democracy, geometry, a rice and herb mixture wrapped in grape leaves, and of course, free speech. By the way, the grape leaves, they suck. Have we ever thought of using cabbage instead? Shut up, you can't say that. Well, yes. Yes, I can. They had two basic concepts they deemed important to this democracy. First was aisgoria. That's the equality of speech. And second was parrhesia. Parrhesia is unlimited speech, or the courageous and frank expression of truth, even when it is unpopular. Those are your pillars of free speech. The decades and centuries marched on. Free speech was the enemy of the rich and the royal, and an implement of the revolutions. One of those revolutions involved a bunch of New Englanders who left the oppression of a kingdom to form the United States, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. They wrote themselves a constitution, the body of which said nothing about free speech. Free speech was an amendment to the Constitution, the first one. Hey, Madison, nice work on the Constitution there. Your quill was obviously on fire, my friend. But if you don't mind a little criticism, I noticed that you said nothing about freedom of speech. Yeah, thanks, Al. You know, I was thinking about that. I think we cover our asses with something called amendments. You mean corrections? No. Amendments. So we could have like a First Amendment. Freedom of speech. And, religion, the press, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition government. You may have something there, Madison. Madman, you are a madman. But it just may work. In Canada, we have a charter of rights and freedoms. Ooh, an entire charter. Section 2B, freedom of expression, it reads, everybody has the following fundamental freedoms. Freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press, and other media of communication. And this is where I say again, there is no free speech. There is mostly free speech. In Canada, right in the Charter, we put limits on free speech. We call them the reasonable limitation on the freedom of expression. I love that phrase. Reasonable limitation. Say what you want without fear of punishment or recrimination, except when it comes to hate speech, incitement to violence, and defamation. Similarly, in the U.S., not all forms of speech are protected by that First Amendment, like incitement, obscenity, defamation, false advertising, and threats. Yes, of course, but what is obscene? What is defamatory? What is incitement? And we have these discussions all the time. It's one of the reasons we have the courts and lawyers and justices. What is right? At the very least, what is fair? In 1919, Supreme Court Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. cited the now famous metaphor, "You can't yell fire in a crowded theater." He was trying to illustrate non-protected speech that may be false or meant to incite harm. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, unless, of course, there is one. So like when Donald Trump yelled, "Stop the steal, the election was rigged, we've got to fight to keep our government," he was yelling fire in a crowded theater where there was not a fire. Here's another one. When a peaceful protest is met by violence from the opposing group, did the protest itself incite the violence? Or was it the very presence of, say, a Hamas flag that was perceived as a threat to those loyal to Israel? Which one of those is freedom of speech? Because you see, the speech of some will always silence or threaten the speech of others. So who says freedom of speech is on their side? It's a tough question. Is it incitement to violence, or someone prone to violence by any incitement? During the counter-Israeli-Palestinian protests in my city, groups were not allowed to protest on a certain overpass bridge, hanging signs from it, etc., because it was dangerous not only to them, but for the people passing below. But eventually somebody would wander onto the bridge and police would try to escort them off the bridge. They would always cite my right to protest, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. But no, not here. We are constantly, as we should be, redrawing the line, trying to please not everyone, but most of the people most of the time. We set the limits of speech, and we hope the people can live within them. Free speech is not the law. Free speech is the concept. It's the limits that are the law. Basically, there are all kinds of exceptions to free speech in a civil society. You might even agree with all of the exceptions. But you have to admit, free speech comes with limitations. And one could say even responsibilities. Our basic definition these days is this: freedom of speech and expression is the fundamental human right to express opinions openly without fear of punishment or censorship. And there's the other thing. We censor things all the time. If not outright, sometimes we just label them, categorize them as suitable for different audiences. We use terms like age-appropriate. We curate. But more on that in a moment. Again, almost all of these exceptions are written into law, and we place an importance on the rule of law. Laws are the explicit social contracts of a functioning free society. And every day we also have these implicit contracts, the implied rules of a society. Those are exceptions that we make also to free speech. We have free speech, but, don't use profanity during dinner at Grandma's house. By the way, try not to mention Beatrice in front of Gary. Still a little sensitive about the breakup. And don't yell at her about the price of beef. She's just a cashier. We could do all of those things under the guise of free speech, but we don't. We seem to be so big on free speech that lately we're always citing it as our rights. My human rights. My rights as an individual. I have the right. And the big one is always free speech. You know what it seems like to me? It seems to me that free speech seemed like a great concept from the deep thinkers of ancient Greece up to the American Revolution and beyond. I'm not saying it isn't a great concept, but really, for over 2,000 years, it was mainly that, a great concept. Everybody has the right to say whatever they want, based on those limits that we wrote down. And that seemed to work fine until everyone in the world got their own individual platform to say anything they wanted to virtually anyone and everyone in the world. Previous to that, free speech was fine, for happy hour at the bar, for the local call-in radio show, even for the rally at the park. But now, everyone is on the world stage. Should we rethink this free speech thing? Because some people really saying some ugly shit. And now, they have a megaphone. Interesting to me that the big social sites of the last 25 years, most of them had no idea what they had created or what big questions they would be facing down the road until they were forced to think about it. I guess that's probably true of all industry though, huh? You don't think of the consequences. You're only thinking of the opportunities. So you cut down the trees and you build the factories and you build an international banking system without realizing it's those very things that are killing the planet. And even when it does dawn on people, it's often a little too late to try and put Pandora back into the box. I guess that's why every generation spends way too much of its time dealing with the consequences of the previous generation's enterprises. But when it comes to social, it's true. Google. You know what Google thought? They thought they would digitize the world's knowledge, and then when the world came to them looking for it, they could sell advertising based on that traffic. There's a famous story from 2002 when Google engineers used to have a daily routine of looking at their popular searches. And they had noticed this trend for a particular search. It was, what was Carol Brady's maiden name on the Brady Bunch TV show? Someone finally realized that it was one of the big money questions the previous night on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. 3 hours later, as the TV show aired on the West Coast, they saw that the same search had trended there. That was their light bulb moment. That's when they realized the significance of their data. It was information and trends and predictability. Previous to that, no idea. By the way, her maiden name was Tyler. Previous to Brady, she was married to a guy whose last name was Martin, but her maiden name is actually Tyler. Well, Facebook, it's a massive data source, right? What was Zuckerberg's goal? He wanted a website to look at the hot chicks of Harvard. Had no idea. Twitter, the same thing. A lot of the free speech discussion was focused around Twitter. This free speech podcast was actually inspired by a recent documentary I watched about Twitter. Founder Jack Dorsey's idea was this site where, in limited characters, you could just tell people what you were doing right now. As we know, it caught on. Then major world events happened, like Arab Spring and Black Lives Matter, and Twitter became the voice of those. The president of Russia was on Twitter. Barack Obama was on Twitter. And Twitter became the voice of all of that, which then led to opposing voices taking to the site. Trump joined, so then there was all that. And you know what? Twitter had no idea and was largely unprepared as to what to do about all the content. Dorsey had this limited notion of free speech, and so did his pal and eventual new owner, Elon Musk. These are not free speech experts. All these guys are just tech and money guys. They're not doctors of psychology and sociology. We shouldn't be listening to their musings about advocating for free speech. Free speech, it's not everything all the time. And that's when those debates started about curated content versus censorship. Dorsey and the team had no idea what they had created in Twitter. Their entire focus was on increasing subscribers, active usage on the platform, making sure the whole thing didn't crash, and generating revenue from all that. They did not spend proper money on the millions and billions of tweets to ensure they were valid. Instead, they just said, well, it's free speech. And that's even after it was proven that certain accounts existed solely for the purpose of incitement, harm, defamation, false advertising, threats, and lies. These are the long-established and mostly agreed-upon limits of free speech. Didn't seem to apply at Twitter. How is that possible? Oh yeah, I know they eventually banned Donald Trump, but how long did that take? For centuries, we have nuanced our so-called free speech within accepted parameters. Plus, we all curate content all the time. Most of us just accept curated content as a part of life. You know, I don't expect to find adult movies at the grocery store. I don't expect to find a good taco at an Italian restaurant. At least no more than I expect to find truth on Truth Social. I think people deserve curated social sites, sites that set limits on content. As long as I know what those limits are, then I can act accordingly. I can participate or not. Curation is not censorship. You may think you have freedom of speech, but as I have often said before, you also have the right to remain silent. Oftentimes that would be the better option. Not everybody wants your opinion just because you have one. I see this on Facebook all the time. People often comment on a post only when they disagree or have something negative to say about it. And then those same people complain how everyone on social media these days is an idiot. And I always wonder, are you also taking the time to like posts? Just click like. It takes seconds. If you don't like something, how about scroll right by without commenting? Or you can always unfollow someone or block or snooze for 30 days. You have choices. Because even when you interact negatively, all Facebook cares about and wants is your interaction, your activity. So they'll just feed you more of the same stuff because that's the stuff you seem to want to interact with. And then suddenly everything seems negative and you're always frustrated. Yeah, I know social media can be manipulative, but you can curate your own content. And you're not limiting your exposure to other points of view. Oh, there's plenty of those around. What you're doing is just turning down the noise. You're just turning down everybody who thinks free speech is totally free without limits. It's almost cliche, I wish it wasn't, but people have made it so, when they say that many have fought and died so that we could enjoy the freedoms we have today. It's true. They did. There are heroes. Even though most wars aren't based on truths and freedoms and social justice. We say they are, but generally, wars are about territory and money. It's easier to justify war by saying that it's about some higher moral standard. And I guess many of the fighting soldiers do believe they are doing their duty for God and country and rights and freedoms. So kudos to them. I appreciate them. I appreciate that whatever stories from the chapters of history got me to this point where I'm living in this country where I mostly do have freedom of speech. I am concerned lately about new limits on that freedom in varying degrees. You know, if because of a certain post Elon Musk cancels my account on X, I don't care that much. It's his store. He can display any mannequins that he chooses. I don't care much about people disagreeing with me on social media. I expect that. But I don't like being threatened there. I don't want to be yelled at by another patron at a grocery store because I'm buying American cheese instead of Canadian. Hey, mind your own business. I worry that if I criticize Doug Ford a little too harshly, he's the Premier of Ontario, that a large black tinted window SUV will be parked outside my home. That last one may be a little on the side of paranoia, but maybe not. I remember during the height of a lot of the street protests, the arrests, the censorship debates, there was this new Canadian on television. It was just a man on the street interview. Police were trying to restore order and all this kind of stuff. And the guy said, "This is freedom. If you want to see real oppression, go to where I came from, Iran." So again, it's freedom, but, by comparison. Yeah, I'm grateful to live in this free country, and I'm aware of certain factions around me that want to make it less so. My rights come with responsibilities. My free speech with limits. No hate, no harm, incitement, obscenity, defamation, false advertising, or threats. Just equality of speech, the courageous and frank expression of truth, even when it is unpopular. Cabbage leaves are better wrapped around rice than grape leaves.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.